Welcome to the Rabbi and The Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Gurri, your shrink, and this is everyone's favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
Well, the good rabbi and I are delighted to have with us not once, but the second time, William Negley. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be back.
We're especially delighted with the timing. You are the founder and CEO of Sound Off, and yes, it sounds like military sound off. And it's an organization devoted to helping vets and service members, military intelligence individuals and their families to do well with mental health, especially combating suicide. And it's an IT-based mental health network with an effort to change not only the delivery system for mental health support, but attitudes. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So why do this? Let's start off. You've told us last time you were on, and I love this story. Let's start there. I think it's a great story. Why start Sound Off?
Yeah.
I like to be clear, right? So that wasn't clear. Let me start over. Why start Sound Off?
Context on me and where I was when I started this foundation. I joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 2009, and my mother is a mental health professional. So I jokingly say I grew up on a couch. Stigmatization was not a thing for me, not because I'm any tougher than anybody else. It's the family that I grew up in. So 2011, we started to hear about this 22 veteran suicide a day number. And it was just very evident to me, and I think anybody else who's lived and worked in this community, that there was this fundamental flaw in how we provide mental health support to the veteran service member, broader national security community.
Yes, sir.
And that flaw, to really sort of simplify it down, is it doesn't matter how much money anyone is spending, VA, Department of Defense, nonprofit. If the Navy SEAL, CIA officer, or Marine won't come in, sit down on a couch and talk about what's going on, all of those resources are irrelevant. And I just knew, again, because I was living it, a lot of these men and women, for reasons of concern of cultural stigmatization or professional blowback, were not going to expose themselves. And it just seemed equally intuitive to me. Well, if the fundamental barrier is they don't want anyone to know that they are seeking help,
right?
Why don't we allow them to seek help without anybody knowing? And that seemingly simple idea is complex, in fact, on every single possible level, but has been the driving thesis of this organization now for the better part of a decade, and we would strongly contend is what is necessary to reach this population that is definitionally otherwise not engaging with mental health support.
And yet we have in the military chaplains who are in the trenches, and they're the most confidential mental health professional in the world. And they come from all faiths. They're not allowed to tell anyone that they've seen you. And yet there comes a time when, for a service member or veteran, well, especially service members that are actively serving, that it might be important to put it on their medical file, that they're needing support. So later on, if they do something less than lovely, they have backup. Otherwise, they get fired. It's a conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah, and so first and foremost, I would emphasize we're not competing with anyone.
No, you're not.
If somebody is going to the VA, if somebody is effectively engaging with support with the chaplain, somebody's going to, DOD or other nonprofit resources, I don't want them coming to Sound Off. Our target audience, the statistic on this that we cite, and this is out of RAND, is that 47% of post 9/11 veterans and service members who have deployed, who meet the definition of major depression or PTSD, have not sought help in the last year. That's not a chaplain, that's not a nonprofit, that's not anywhere.
Does that statistic include the veterans who are actively serving?
That includes those serving and veterans.
Okay. All right.
So our target is that 47% that is not engaging. And yes, we fully acknowledge and recognize that it creates for some strange structures and tensions, but ultimately, we are philosophically of the view that, and I think we've received support that agrees with this. It is ultimately a net benefit that that person be seeking help or engaged with help versus not engaged at all, right? I mean, we don't claim to be the absolute best option. We claim to be better than nothing. And again, for our target audience, that's the alternative, is that they're not engaged with help at all.
Well, better than nothing is not as good a motto as your motto for those who answered the call.
Yes.
I like that motto.
And just to say it differently, to say our other motto, support on their terms is really the driving philosophy here. We should not force them to change their concerns, legitimate or not, about professional blowback or stigmatization. We should meet them where they are to allow them to feel safe accessing help.
Rabbi?
I mean, that's a point that's really worth following up in here and everywhere, meeting people where they are. But what occurs to me is that, we're sort of the most counseled and therapized, is that a word?
It is now.
Generations ever. I mean, the stigma of therapy is almost completely gone. Political leaders, CEOs, celebrities, where everybody's talking about the therapy. How come that hasn't spilled over into the military?
Well, I would say, it's funny you're asking this question, because just in the last 2 days, I've seen a fair amount of data on two other populations: collegiate athletes and medical professionals. And, we use the term, this is a really important distinction. So Sound Off emphasizes 4 core barriers to entry: bureaucracy, takes too long, it's too complicated; geography, I'm too far away; trust, I don't want to talk to a doctor; and then what we call a personal and professional desire for anonymity. Most people say stigmatization. That's really not a precise way to describe this, because it's really two separate things. There is cultural stigmatization. I don't want my friends, family, community to know that I'm seeking help. And then there's concern for professional blowback, right? I could lose my security clearance. I could lose my MD license. That is a distinct and real thing that often gets conflated with stigmatization. To your question, though, I think we don't need to pretend that there is not a heightened level of, let's say, machismo within the United States military that might dissuade that. I generally agree with you, though, that we are seeing, and I've seen a little bit of data and a lot of anecdotal reporting on this, that the United States military has been burned down so badly over the last 20 years and how it's been used. There is an increasing acceptance of mental health support and engaging with mental health support at the interpersonal sort of cultural level. But ultimately, that doesn't impact, may not impact the issues around concern of professional blowback that prevents as many of these men and women from seeking help as not.
One message I've heard that has helped many people get help is the connection with head injury, the closed head injuries or others, and calling it a brain injury, not mental health, even though the brain is about mental health as well. That loophole, which is a reality, that people think of it as, I can get help because my temper is because of my head injury. I can get help because my depression comes with my head injury, the rage and all that kind of stuff. So that's been a fascinating new opening. into stigma-free help, but then you have to say you have a brain injury.
Yeah.
And how does that limit you? And some brain injuries you heal from and some you do not. And it's on a dimmer switch. Some you'll always have. I have a TBI from a drunk driver, or there's always some things that I won't be able to do the same. Most people would notice, but there's no stigma since I hire myself. I'm self-employed, right?
Uh-huh. I'll share a story, and I think we're going to discuss my brother-in-law here in a bit.
Yes, please.
I'll share a story about my brother-in-law who was a SEAL, who was struggling with this exact issue, the decision to engage with support. He ultimately went to what is known as NICO, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. And it was exactly what you just discussed that allowed him to feel comfortable seeking help there. That they kind of marketed themselves, I think, somewhat to their credit, probably strategically so, as a whole body. We're looking at everything, we're checking the whole system out. And so he didn't have to, in that context, confront, oh, well, we're talking about PTSD or something. We're looking at the whole machine, if you will. And of course, as part of that, we're going to look at the brain and the head and the mental health, because we're checking out the whole machine.
I love that. I think it's good. So good. Tell us your story, please, because I think it's very compelling. And just so that everyone knows the context, you spent quite a bit of time in Afghanistan. You've been an aide. Let me see. I'm trying to think of who it was you were an aide for. Who were you the aide for?
Yeah, Senator Hutch. So I finished graduate school in 2007 and came to DC and was a national security staffer for Senator Hutchison of Texas.
Wow.
And the sort of funny story I tell is I was 2 weeks into the job and I went to the chief of staff and I said, hey, I really appreciate this first job, but this isn't really what I want to do. I'm really trying to join the CIA, and would the senator be willing to write me a letter? And I think he was just so half shocked and half, thrilled that this young person was coming to him saying that he ended up getting her to write a letter, which undoubtedly helped, me get into the agency.
And here you were an advisor on national security issues, and we all know that the wellness of our troops is a national security issue. Because, as you know, as a refugee, I believe that our military keeps America free and strong.
Yeah.
And so I'm always grateful for that.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a nonprofit professional. And I'm certainly not a clinician or a researcher or anything else.
And yet you are a nonprofit.
I consider myself a national security professional.
You are.
And I see Sound Off as, fundamentally serving a critical element of our national security. I just saw an article in CNN this morning that they had to pull 200 sailors off of an aircraft carrier because of the number of suicides that they've had on that carrier. Well, what is the national security impact of having to pull, 200 sailors off of that ship? How is the operational capacity of that ship impacted? So I see these things as very much, related together.
I do too. I think you are certainly the right person for the right job. So please share with everyone the story of your brother-in-law and how you came to the point of Sound Off.
So 2009, I joined the agency. 2011, we start hearing about these numbers. And again, this answer seems fairly intuitive to me. And for the first couple of years, I didn't do anything about it because I said, it's such an obvious answer. Somebody is going to do this, right? The VA is going to build something that lets people engage anonymously. I go to Afghanistan in 2012, come back in 2013, and nobody's done it. And this idea has continued to sort of percolate. And I said, I gotta try this. So 2013, I take some leave without pay from the agency to start kind of building the basic infrastructure of this organization. We have a big funding deal with a very large veteran-focused nonprofit that ultimately fell through because they were having some financial issues. And so 13, 14, 15, we're trying to overcome what is a fairly fundamental chicken or egg problem for sound off. I didn't set out to build an app. I set out to allow individuals to engage truly anonymously with mental health, peer or clinical support, and the same individual over and over and over. Real treatment. The only way that I could see to do that was through a piece of technology. Because if I see your face, if I've got your phone number, if I've got your name, it's not anonymous. So we needed to overcome this, in hindsight, about $1 million chicken or egg problem to build the technology before we could help a single person. So we have this big deal that kind of falls through, and that the kind of final nail in the coffin on that deal is January 2017. So that spring, I'm in Texas, and we say, okay, we're just going to try and raise a little bit of capital to do a really minimum viable product in the state of Texas to demonstrate the thesis of what we're doing. And then June 9th, 2017, Bill Mulder, my brother-in-law, killed himself in Bernie, Texas. Bill
I'm
had
so sorry about that.
Thank you. Bill had retired from the SEAL teams 127 days earlier, the last decade or so at SEAL Team 6 Dev Group. And it was precisely this issue. Bill was never going to expose himself in a way that he felt, rightly or wrongly, would compromise his reputation or career. So by the time he got out, he was, in pretty bad shape. So here I've been running around with the PowerPoint deck, quite literally, talking about all these men and women that won't engage with mental health support, and it's literally going on in my own family. So with Bill's death, my sister gets very involved in our organization as a sort of de facto spokesperson. And all of a sudden, we're able to raise the capital necessary to build this platform.
He would be so proud, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, and I think both for Sydney, more importantly for Sydney, my sister, but also for myself, it's kind of cliche to say, but it gives some meaning to this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
And it is, and I'm not taking anything away from these organizations, but it's very common for somebody to die in combat or somebody to die by suicide, and somebody starts a foundation. And I think that's wonderful, and they should do that. But I think it is fair to say the fact that I had literally been working this for years, and this was the exact issue, and the answer was kind of in the hopper, so to speak, made for a very powerful relationship between my sister and myself, and ultimately our supporters and what we're doing now.
It's unfortunate that sometimes it takes these type of events to be the catalyst. As good as our intentions are, as much as effort we put into it, sometimes it just takes something tragic to.
You're preaching to the choir. I mean,
yeah.
The data didn't change. My presentation didn't change, right? I mean, kind of quite literally, my presentation didn't change. It's just the 12 minutes before the presentation, my presentation. Now my sister's on stage telling the story, ripping your heart out of your chest, and people are really paying attention.
That's sad. That is really sad. And now you have Sound Off. I noticed that on your website, it's sound-off, right? .com. And people can go in and get information on how to help a loved one or help themselves, how to find a way to be supported if you want to be a buddy, a peer buddy, or if you want to be a mental health provider, or if you want to donate money. I also noticed you have, since I didn't notice the last time we interviewed you, but you have this beautiful shop that has this really cool t-shirt that it's kind of like camo, but not, and it's got these blue eyes. Tell me about that t-shirt. What's the
It's
design
funny
of
you're
it?
asking about that. So I drew that drawing
Wow.
the fall after of September 11th. And, you know, I knew I was sort of interested in entering the military. Obviously, that was a very militarized, for lack of a better term, time.
Yes.
And so, you know, now literally 2 decades later, when I was starting this organization, it just, that image that I had drawn really resonated with the work I was doing in Sound Off. And so I said, let's make a t-shirt out of it.
And if people buy your mug, you have 2 mugs, one with the logo and one with your motto.
Yeah.
And the t-shirts, you have 2 different t-shirts there. Does that money go toward your donation funds or no?
Yeah, everything, all dollars coming in anywhere go towards, you know, the ultimate work that we're doing. And you know, I mean, just to discuss the economics of Sound Off a little bit, because it's both challenging in that we've had to overcome, again, that sort of chicken or egg problem. But now, over the last 2 years, we overcame what I call that first hard problem of funding that technology. But then we faced early 2020, what I call the new hard problem, which is scaling and growth and awareness. And that became very quickly evident that was an exceedingly expensive thing to.
It is expensive.
Yeah. So, I mean, as an example, we were looking at a 1-year budget for Texas alone, just for recruiting clinicians, peers, and informing veterans and service members about our service, of about $1 million. We realized for an organization without a revenue, you know, without an earned revenue line, that is not a sustainable number. So we now partner with other benevolent organizations and work together to drive that outreach effort in their community. So organizations like the Navy SEAL Foundation, Special Forces Charitable Trust, EOD Warrior, and others. And we get to remain the technology provider in the middle, acting as a force multiplier to all of these organizations that we partner with.
That is brilliant. That, because then you can do the thing that no one seemed to be doing, and then you're the connector. I love that idea.
Exactly.
When you talk about building a kind of a coalition and a partnership, an alliance, it reminds me, I wish I could remember who gave this TED talk, but it was really fascinating. Thesis he proposed. He questioned that the soldiers in World War II experienced the same type of horrors that modern soldiers did, and yet we didn't hear a lot about PTSD back then. And his thesis is that when those soldiers came home, they came home to a much more cohesive, structured society where most people were invested in the same values. And therefore they could find the kind of support in their communities that they felt when they were in the military. But now we live in such a fractured society that soldiers come back and they feel lost. And it's not entirely what they went through, it's that they don't have anything really to come home to that replaces that camaraderie and that structure and those common values. And so what you're describing is, by expanding a kind of support infrastructure on many different levels, it's trying to compensate for the lack of a supportive structure in society at large.
Yeah, and I think that is a significant can of worms that I will weigh in to say. I think there's both and in the sense that we have relied upon a smaller group of people to be fighting our war more consistently for a longer period of time than maybe ever in human history.
Absolutely. And there's less and less time in between the deployments. It's
And
been just such a sacrifice.
and on the other side, that population that is serving has become increasingly demographically isolated.
Yes.
So the ability for communities that are not part of that demography, it's the exact challenge that you're discussing, that the ability to engage and relate versus, my grandfather, who was, from a wealthy family in San Antonio, lost both of his brothers in World War II. And he was not unique in that experience. Everyone knew someone
Yes.
engaged in that war. It was a national collective experience that, to be quite, not to wade into the politics of this, but if that had been the experience of the last 20 years of war, it wouldn't have been 20 years of war, because everyone feeling it would never have allowed it to drag out for 20 years, good, bad, or otherwise. And I have my views on those wars, but it was really felt by such a small percentage of the population that it allowed it to extend. And so now, exactly to your point, when they're coming home, they're walking into, GE corporate America. How do I translate this? How do I relate to this? And there's a lot of good organizations that are helping do that and helping those veterans transition that way. But it's certainly more challenging than 80 years ago, when there was no transition because everybody else at GE had been at that war with you, to exaggerate the point.
So, Rabbi, one of the things that I love the way you address is the whole issue of when we invite a compelling guest on, the issue of that and ethics. So please address that. We need a rabbi input.
Well, I think we're already into it.
We are.
The ethics of responsibility. Ultimately, that's intrinsic to our definition of ethics, is taking responsibility, being disciplined to recognize and take responsibility for the impact our actions have on others. And that doesn't only mean our public behavior, because our private behavior becomes public behavior. And to start with being aware. What you're doing, William, is you're helping us recognize the immediacy of an issue that we're all, vaguely aware of or somewhat conscious of, but bringing it home. And your own personal story is so compelling, of course, because who knows if somebody that I'm very close to, I taught high school, and I had a student who was, a lovely young lady. She was always smiling. She was always cheerful. And one day in college, she jumped out of her dormitory window in Manhattan. And, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Yeah. And so the ethics of awareness, first knowing that there's a problem that may be much closer to home. And second, getting some guidance. What can I do to help? Because I don't always see how my actions can directly support those in need. And being able to bridge that gap, to be able to communicate that, or provide an infrastructure, whereas I can make some sort of significant contribution, whether it's time, money, thought, effort, communication, that itself is a profound service to the community, because we all depend on each other, and we owe such a debt of gratitude to those who put their lives on the line for the ideal of freedom.
Yeah, that's spot on. That really is our role. And this is, as the organization has matured, it's increasingly become clear that is our role, is to provide that avenue by which people like my mother, who's a Jungian analyst, can come on and engage with a Army EOD officer, explosive ordnance disposal officer, who otherwise was not ready to talk to anybody. And now she's been seeing him in her private practice for, I think, a year and a half pro bono.
Good for her.
And you know, so that is our role. And you know, to the ethic of supporting this community, you know, this is there's a lot of people struggling across this country, and I believe that we have an obligation, you know, a collective obligation to support our fellow man and woman. But this is the population that is, to some degree, struggling because they stepped forward and volunteered on our behalf.
Yes.
And that is just, to me, a fundamentally different thing, and kind of puts them at the front of the line. You know, I want to support everybody. And believe me, we have discussions about how can we bring Sound Off in support of all different communities. And we're having those discussions. But why did I start this with this population, beyond the fact that it's, again, my life's work? Because my brother-in-law died because he spent 20 years kicking in doors on behalf of this country. And you can agree or disagree with whether we should have been doing that, but he wasn't given a choice. He volunteered and went and did it for a lot of people who didn't. So I think we have a deep, deep ethical obligation to support those men and women. And to expand one bit on that, this problem is both immediate and very long-term. You know, when we hear about the 22 veteran suicide a day number, the preponderance of those suicides at that time were Vietnam veterans. This is not a today problem. This is a today, next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now problem. This isn't going away. If anything, it's going to get worse. And so, to the degree that we can make it a today problem and get those men and women to engage today, how can that change the outcome 20, 30, 40 years from now?
I think that's wonderful. So since you're, one of the things that the rabbi and I talk about in terms of ethics is the ethic of self-care. Since we want you around for the feeling well and healthy for the next 20, 30 years, what are you doing, sir, for self-care?
And you know, we were talking about this before. It is challenging.
It is.
And anyone who has really, you know, been a startup, which is fundamentally what we are, founder, it's challenging. There's a lot of books and a lot of work done to support startup founders. You know,
and also for people immersed to the issue of mental health crisis.
That is it.
I mean, so you've got a double whammy.
Yeah, that's an excellent second point, that being exposed to violence and in this way can be challenging. You know, there's a lot of things I should be doing better. I'll say that up front. I should be eating better. I should be, you know, working out more and all of those things. But, you know, I've got a wife, a 2.5-year-old, and a 5-year-old that are my whole universe.
That's nice.
And so, you know, as much as we both work, and she's a university professor, you know, what provides me greater joy and relief in my life than anything else by a mile is 5 p.m. Albert, my, you know, almost 3-year-old, is bashing in the door, and my 5.5-year-old daughter are coming in the door, and I get, you know, a couple hours with them. And that really, again, it's not everything I should be doing, but that really, to me, is a really meaningful, you know, stress relief / you know, wonderful experience to be able to have.
Well, we know that belonging and meaning and affection are some of the antidotes for stress and for some, not that you're suicidal, but for people with suicidal challenges. So I think you're showing them the way. That's wonderful.
Yeah, the
we're
children,
very
of course,
happy you have that.
represent the future, and especially at that age when they're adorable.
They are delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, if they were teenagers, I might have to be figuring out something else to do to relieve my stress a little bit.
I tell you what, teenagers help us become better versions of ourselves. They're a challenge. And if you have a platinum tongue groove where you can bite your tongue repeatedly, it helps. But they teach you things you never wanted to learn about yourself in the world. I mean, really.
I'll tell you what, my almost 6-year-old daughter, I'm starting now for the first time to sort of see the eye rolls a little bit and the attitude. And I'm just thinking, oh man.
Well, congratulations. We
Here
certainly
we
do
go.
not want boring children without personality. So we're
They're
delighted.
not without personalities, that's for sure.
Speaking of not boring, Rabbi, do you have a word of the day for us, sir?
I do have a word of the day.
I figured you would.
It's a word that I came upon recently. I think I probably got it from our friend Susan Brooks, the grammar goddess. The word is pentimento. Pentimento, which is the presence or emergence of earlier images, forms, or strokes that have been changed and painted over. So
Wow.
I have a certain fascination with the Mona Lisa, and I put her on the cover of my book, Proverbial Beauty. But there's all the art critics and art students have theorized what is it that makes Mona Lisa so compelling. And they've done x-rays and they've found that Leonardo painted image after image after image after image on the same canvas. And while our conscious mind only processes the top layer, but all those layers beneath add a kind of texture that we process subconsciously that gives depth and life. And I thought that was an appropriate word for our discussion, because really, aren't we the same? We have layers and layers and layers. Of course, anybody who's seen Shrek knows that not only ogres, but all human beings are onions. We have our layers. And some of those layers can be traumatized, can be damaged, can represent trying times. But it's the totality of our experience that forms who we are. And it's the willingness of us to look beneath the outer layer of others, to recognize who they are. The sages say, judge every person favorably, but you could also read it in Hebrew, judge the whole person favorably. Until we understand the whole person, we really aren't in a position to make any kind of reasonable judgments. And so what you're doing, William, is you are probing for the underlayers to help heal the wounds, to help create a more whole person, that people where they can judge themselves. So we have to judge ourselves favorably as well. And so we really salute you for what you're doing. And I know that Doctor, you were very excited to have William because of the good work that you do with vets and with suicidal patients, which is a tremendous service as well. So I really do salute both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was good. That's a perfect word for you. So William, with that perfect canvas, what would be final words of wisdom, call to action for today?
So certainly, sound-off.com. One day I'll get soundoff.com when the owner of that domain is willing to hand it over. You can learn more about our organization. If you are a mental health professional, you can sign up via the application to volunteer your time. If you are a veteran, you can learn about becoming a peer supporter. And then, of course, we're always raising financial support to fund this technology. So, most importantly of all, if you are a veteran service member, national security professional, who is struggling, by all means, come to us or seek help elsewhere. It's, most importantly is that, those people are seeking help. More broadly than that, I would, my sort of macro view of Sound Off and the broader call to action, the discussion that we're having, is to be more thoughtful, ethical, proactive in how we think about solving these challenges and the need to move beyond what can be sort of stagnant status quo at times, and think differently and proactively about what we need to do that may involve questioning, challenging in some cases, long held preconceived notions about, what the answers are. Because, at least in this challenge, in the Veteran Service Member Suicide Challenge, it's not working. And we need to do something differently to support this population.
That's lovely. Well, we're grateful to you for what you're doing. We're proud for you and your family for all you're doing. Hey, we'd love to have your Elizabeth Reed on sometime, and who's your CEO. And we would also love to have your mama on.
He's also a rock star.
A Jungian analyst. Ooh, that's wonderful.
So a little 2 more sentences of my mother. Before she was an analyst, she was a cordon bleu trained chef for many years.
Ooh, we need you to hook us up with these 2 powerful women in your life.
So in much of her writing, she combines, sort of imagery of food and with her analysis. So
yummy. All right.
It really makes for a compelling discussion.
Well, I can't wait. That's wonderful.
Well, thank you, William. It's
Really
quite inspiring what you're doing, and it calls on all of us to ask ourselves, what can we do to help those to whom we're indebted and those who are in need. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
Doctor, what's your last word?
Here are my last words. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, and it is a good month. And of course, every day is reach out to a vet. And we got to remind everyone that even current service members are considered vets because they have served already. Intelligence officers and those who support them. Show them love, appreciation, a sense of belonging, affection. Be there for them. Reach out. Doesn't take much. You don't have to talk about suicide, but do reach out with some loving support. And I think then the world will be a better place. That's all I had to say about that. Thank you again, William, and of course, Rabbi. This has been the Rabbi and the Shrink, bringing to you William Negley and Sound Off, sound-off.com, helping vets and service members all around the world, especially now with May Mental Health Month. You all take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Rabbi and the Shrink, Everyday Ethics Unscripted. To book Dr. Red Shoe, Dr. Margarita Gurri, or Rabbi Yonason Goldson as speakers or advisors for your organization, contact them at therabbiandtheshrink.com. This has been a Dr. Red Shoe production.